This Saturday afternoon to the Crucible Theatre. I'm on it venue in the city of Sheffield, and I think it's a very fitting place to welcome here today Jeremy Corbyn, somebody who's certainly brought a bit of drama back into politics. My name's Chris Peace. I'm a local councillor here. I'm also involved with the Albury campaign. I have to say that since the Labour leadership election has begun, we've certainly had plenty of theatricals, certainly from political parties, the press. I mean, luckily we've got Jeremy here today, centre stage, to speak to us. It's also an honour today that there's going to be the launch of a new organisation called Northern Futures, and John Prickett will be giving a further explanation about that, how you can be involved in that. And it's actually being launched here in Sheffield. We've managed to pick Manchester, where it's going to be launched later tonight. When Ed Miliband resigned on the 8th of May, he said, "I can't believe it isn't simply leaders who achieve change, it is people who will make change happen." Now, I have to say, when the initial reports of who would be standing for the leadership of our party, Labour Party, came out, I have to confess I wasn't really inspired with hope. And I wasn't quite sure how loud the voice of those people to make change would penetrate. I have to say then, when Jeremy received the necessary nominations, I think there was a feeling that change from the grassroots could be at the forefront. And I think we should also remember the MPs who did nominate Jeremy, so he did appear on the ballot paper. It's moved on far from that. Over the last few weeks, we've watched a mass movement inspired by someone offering a real alternative, someone standing to deliver a new kind of politics with tackling injustice at its very helm. I'm supporting Jeremy because he offers a politics that argues for growth and not austerity, for fairer taxation across the board, action on climate change, a proper house building programme and better rent controls, foreign policy that prioritises justice and assistance, better workplace conditions, a fully funded NHS and a lifelong education system regardless of wealth. That sounds good, doesn't it? There's no wonder at all membership of the Labour Party has increased so much, because this is what the country needs, this is what Sheffield needs, and this is what a Labour movement is all about. There's never been a more important time for our party to listen to its grassroots across the nation, and I firmly believe with Jeremy as leader, we can bring a new social movement dedicated to bringing about that real change. Well, that's already begun, and we've seen that ourselves. And regardless of the result, what has happened cannot be ignored, and it remains up to us to ensure that we continue. If you've joined the Labour Party, get involved with your local branch, your local CLP. If you're in a union, go to your union meetings, take action, get involved with action groups like the People's Assembly. All this has to carry on, regardless of what result we have on the 12th of September. And in particular, two things I'll highlight now. There's going to be a party that's been organised by the Sheffield for Corbyn campaign. That's going to be on the 20th of September between 3 and 7 p.m. at Queen's Social Club on Queen's Road. I'll remind you at the end. And if you can't wait till the 20th of September to get together with some friends and have a relaxing drink and a discussion, then there's an event immediately after this organised by the Young People Supporters Group of Jeremy's campaign, and they're meeting informally at the Old Monk just over the way in Tudor Square, so please come along to that. Well, we're hoping that Jeremy has started addressing the crowd outside, big crowd in Tudor Square, and he'll be addressing us in here in due course. And after that, there will be a question and answer session. Now, it's not answers on the floor. You need to text in your questions, and you can do that during this session now. On the back of the ticket, there's a white sticky label, and it gives you the number on there. We know there will be lots of questions, and I know people from his campaign will be working hard to get together any similar questions, and we will try and get through as many as we can before we have to get Jeremy on a train, and he has to be on that train. However, as well as Jeremy, we've got 6 other great speakers here today, all Corbyn supporters, and I'd like to introduce the first of those now. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the MP for Hemsworth, John Trickett.
Well, thank you very much, and being a Yorkshire MP, what a better place couldn't there be than the Crucible in Sheffield, one of the great venues in one of the great northern cities. And I first joined the Labour Party in 1969, and I don't quite know how many Labour Party meetings I've attended, but anyway, several thousand, so how sad am I? But this is the most amazing Labour Party meeting I have ever seen, and I guess I can speak for most of you to say the same thing too. And why has the Labour Party suddenly increased from 200,000 to well over 500,000 people? It's because Jeremy has lit a spark. His politics speak about true Labour values. True Labour values, which the Labour Party should always remember, and the reasons why our party was established in the first place. Values of social justice, decency, recognising the common humanity of all of us, not looking down on people because they're poorer than us, or demonising people because they have to go on benefits or they're sick or disabled. Recognising the common humanity of people who are being driven out of their countries and seeking asylum because they're persecuted in the regimes which they inhabited. An intense dislike and hatred of inequality, and a rejection of austerity. These are true Labour values which Jeremy espouses. True Labour values which refuse to accept a society which is being created by the Tories about what we call neoliberalism, where the millionaires are rewarded and the millions are left to look after themselves. And the Occupy movement, remember them in St Paul's and elsewhere, took flame throughout the world. They talked about a society which was 1% and 99%. And they were right, weren't they? The Tories are acting on behalf of the 1%. It's for Labour and the movement which Jeremy is creating to represent the rest. The middle income earners who are seeing their incomes disappearing, and the poorer people who are facing all kinds of problems. And those people who are now being driven to use food banks, especially in winter when they have to choose, as we know, between heating a home and feeding the children. This is the kind of country which we are seeing being created around us, and one which Jeremy has said we must put an end to. The Tories' behalf of the 1%. It's our job to represent the rest. But you know, and I'm a close friend and colleague of Jeremy. I was the first member of Parliament to nominate him, and I still am the only member of the Shadow Cabinet to have supported him. Around the Shadow Cabinet table, I think there are 26 of us. I think it is odd that there's only one of us supporting him, and yet here are hundreds of thousands in the country who are saying, hang on, this is the kind of politics we want to hear. But Jeremy himself, and I and the rest of us in our team, believe that when a country needs big change, as our country does, and our world does too, that big change never happens because of individuals, because of politicians or princes or prime ministers or presidents or emperors or religious leaders either. Big change only happens when thousands of people, tens of thousands of people come together and say things cannot go on in this way any longer, and that I, along with thousands of others, will commit myself to making the change which our country needs happen. And so Jeremy is part of a movement which you are the central actors in, because without you and the people outside on the streets and everywhere where Jeremy goes are the people who will make change happen, rather than those of us who are the privileged for the time being to be Labour MPs. Big change only happens in that way. Now I want you to hold that thought in your mind, because I want to speak about this new organisation which Jeremy and I and the others are launching today Northern Futures. I want to speak about the north of England. I'm going to come back to this thought about how change happens. Because the north of England, and here's a great northern city, the city of Sheffield, is suffering from a triple whammy. There isn't time to go through in detail, but a triple whammy. Deindustrialisation brought about with Thatcher and the Thatcher Consensus, which was never properly challenged, even after Thatcher had gone. Deindustrialisation, which meant so many areas of our wonderful region, the north of England, were left without any economic purpose anymore, and no effort really to create a new economic structure as the old industries died. Steel, coal, I represent coal communities in Hemsworth, shipbuilding, textiles, engineering, and all the great industries which made our country such a wealthy place. Deindustrialisation was the first of the triple whammy. The second was the centralisation of our country, where so many decisions are now taken either in the City of London or in the bankers or in Westminster, who pay little regard, frankly, to the needs of regions such as the north and elsewhere too. And then the third part of the triple whammy is austerity. Because we know what happened, don't we, in 2007 and 8. The privately owned bankers almost brought our country and the whole of the Western economy down. This was a problem of the private sector. The state, and I was in number 10 Downing Street working with Gordon on the weekend when we had to bail out the banks. The state had to bail out the banks. We took on to the state, the public sector, the debts of the bankers, but we left the bankers mainly private, so that the profits which they made and the bonuses they gave to themselves remained a private operation, but the debt which they created remained with the public sector. And who paid for who is still paying for the debts which the bankers had incurred? It's the taxpayer, it's all of us. And those three things together, austerity, centralisation of our country, and deindustrialisation, have left the north in a weakened position. And the north needs to recover. We need new infrastructure, we need to tackle poverty, low incomes, poor productivity, companies which have got very low rates of profit, and all the other problems which the north faces. Otherwise, I fear a long-term decline for this great city and elsewhere. And what did all those things amount to? It amounted to villages, which I represent pit villages, towns and cities even, with no economic purpose left for them, all over the north of England. And if you don't have an economic purpose, if you have no sense of where you're going as a city or a community, then the community itself becomes purposeless, and the sense of community begins to fall. And that is what we're facing across the whole of the north of England. We need a sense of purpose and direction again. And we need to reject the Tory idea that what their idea, Osborne's idea, of how you treat the north, is to hand over to councils the delegated power to make Tory cuts. And what do we have? Labour councils, up and down the north of England, with what Osborne says is Northern Powerhouse. It's actually the delegation of cuts. That's what's happening. You all know that. If we're going to resolve the problems of the north, we don't want delegation of cuts. We want devolution of power. Power to the north and authority too. That is what is required in order to hear northern voices. And for northern voices and northern minds and northern communities, once again, to have the power to regenerate themselves. And that is why, talking to Jeremy, we decided to launch an organisation, Northern Futures. Northern Futures is intended to be a movement, and let's be clear about it, a movement of the left, with the values which Jeremy has embraced, anti-austerity, for decentralisation, and for a new settlement for our country, where the market isn't left simply to destroy so many communities as it has been. Northern Futures is a new organisation. It's been launched in Sheffield now, and then later this afternoon in Manchester, so you were first to hear about it. Now let me return to this thought at the beginning, which I started with. Because change of the scale which is needed for the region which we all love, where most of you, I guess, live, your families are, and your futures are, will only happen if we ourselves decide to make it happen. It will not do enough for you to come to one meeting in Sheffield this afternoon, as wonderful as it is. And it will not do for you to vote simply for Jeremy and then to think you can go and watch telly. We need a movement which is led by ordinary people of this country, and in this case of our region. And we as elected representatives will place ourselves at your disposal. And that's what this organisation is about. At the back of the room, when you go out of the door, please sign the piece of paper, leave your details, and we'll be in touch shortly. Now let me finish with this quote. Because for a century, the north of England, whose values remain strong in terms of social solidarity, where we look after each other, where we know that the strong should look after the weak, where we have a passionate sense of social justice, the north of England stood by the Labour Party, just as Scotland once did, for over a century. Now it's time the Labour Party stood by the north.
Thank you very much. If I could now ask Kat Fletcher over there to speak to us. Kat works on the Jeremy's campaign. She'll explain the work that she does on that campaign. We are moving people in and out. John is now going to address Tudor Square.
Thank you very much. Huge honour to be on this platform today, not least because I myself am a proud product of this great city. I learned my politics growing up here, and most importantly, it's where I learned and embraced the concept of solidarity. It's also not far from here, down on Brandall Road, that I first stood in an election. At 17, for a part-time student union position at Sheffield College. An election that first led me to know and campaign alongside Jeremy Corbyn. Firstly against tuition fees and in defence of student grants, and then on a variety of other vital causes, from saving legal aid to Justice for Colombia to opposing the Iraq War. And that movement, the movement against the Iraq War, was what I thought the largest political movement that I'd ever been involved in this country. And then Jeremy Corbyn decided he was going to stand to be leader of the Labour Party. I thought I'd reached peak Corbyn when I acted as his election agent in the May elections, but nothing could ever have prepared me for what this summer would bring. In my 17 years of campaigning, I've never been involved in anything like this. Nothing that has motivated people on this scale, inspired young and old alike, and begun to change the political narrative of this country in such a dramatic way. I'm not going to lie to you, when I was initially asked to get involved and help mobilise the volunteers, I knew it wasn't going to be a quiet and relaxed summer. I knew it'd be a thing, that some people would want to be galvanised to stand up behind a man of principle and conviction, a man who truly lives his politics. But I never dreamed it would be this. I'm not going to repeat others' messages because I think that in this room we have more that unites us than divides us. Instead, I want to talk about some of the experiences of the thousands who are helping on this campaign and who I've had the enormous privilege of spending this summer with. Like Scott. Scott is an 83-year-old who volunteers every single day in my office. He puts back together the packs that we use every evening to make calls for Corbyn. He's there because he's a socialist and he's been waiting for this moment in the Labour Party for over 40 years. There's Jenny, who wants to give back to the man who was stood by her to fight to free her partner, who was abducted in Yemen and transferred illegally to Ethiopia. She felt powerless to act, but she found a champion in Jeremy. There's Rohi, who starts at Manchester Uni this September, training to be a doctor. She wants to specialise in geriatric care, a career choice that clearly isn't being made from a very selfish perspective. But like her and the other dozens of students who want to be students, they're all being crippled with a lifetime of debt for a right to an education that will benefit society as a whole. There's Faduma, a teacher who cancelled her summer holiday and is hoping for a party leader that will stand up to the pernicious attacks on our education system. Rebecca, a GP who knows the dangers of creeping privatisation of the NHS. And William, who makes calls every day from his home in Gloucester because he's campaigned for international peace and justice for 30 years and finally feels like he has a candidate he can believe in for the long term. William, incidentally, recently called someone when he was doing his calls for Corbyn who shared his mother's maiden name. Turns out they're first cousins. They're meeting for the first time next week. That's the power of this campaign, bringing families together. And every day, the letters come. The thank you for standing letters, the small donation cheques, £1, £3, people giving anything that they can. The letters of desperation come too. The letters from people being branded as scroungers as they have their disability living allowance cut. The letters from mothers who are losing their homes because of the bedroom tax. And the letters that are simply cheering Jeremy on because they, like I, and I suspect like you, know that things can and should be different. There absolutely is an alternative. Now this campaign may be gathered around one admittedly pretty great guy, right? But in reality, it is so much bigger than that. This campaign is about Rohi, Faduma, Yeni, Scott, Will, Rebecca, and the thousands of people across this country who are coming together and fighting for the politics of hope. Now, as the volunteers coordinator on this campaign, I would not be doing my job if I didn't tell you that there are only 2 weeks to go, that this race is not over, that every vote counts, and there are still tens of thousands of people that we need to reach. So after you leave here, don't let that be it. Join us at our phone banks, help us reach members and supporters, and join the most exciting political movement that any of us have seen, certainly in my lifetime. Because no matter what happens on 12th of September, this campaign has changed things. It's changed people's lives, it has inspired a generation, it has changed how politics works in this country. I'm proud to stand up against austerity. I'm proud to stand up against the demonisation of people on welfare. I'm proud to stand up for a better, more equal society. I'm proud to stand up for international justice. And more than anything else, I'm damn proud to stand up with Jeremy Corbyn. Thank you.
I'm now very pleased to introduce Abissam Mohammed. Abissam is an active Labour Party member, Programme Director of the Yemeni Community Association here in Sheffield. She's been delivering health education and support services for young people, old people across the city for 12 years. She's also a practicing solicitor and a community activist. She's received recognition for her work in advocating for the most vulnerable people in our society and here in Sheffield. If I can introduce Abissam Mohammed.
Okay, my experience, what I'm going to talk about today is my general experience personally in getting involved in politics and the reason why I'm here today supporting Jeremy. In 2010, when Labour lost the initial the election and the coalition won, I was angry with the coalition cuts that were inflicted on local communities. I was involved in campaigns in cuts against early years, cuts against local libraries, cuts against services that we all have here in Sheffield. And one of the things that made me want to get involved was how I was involved locally in communities and how I could see it affected people on a grassroots level. But I wasn't entirely convinced that Labour was the right party for me. And so I remember speaking to a friend, just generally sort of, giving the perspective that I had. And she gave me this very cheesy analogy, sort of saying, political parties are like baskets of fruit. When you go to a supermarket, you generally pick the basket that has the most fruit in the basket. And so using that cheesy analogy, I was able to actually pick the party that I wanted to stand for, but I wasn't still entirely convinced that being active politically was the right move. What I'd seen of politics was actually quite ugly. And what I'd seen nationally, and sort of whenever you watch Question Time on Newsnight, the mudslinging matches, the constant criticism, was everything that I didn't want to be in politics. And then the Labour leadership campaign started. When I was presented with 4 individuals, 3 who told us what I believed they thought we wanted to hear, and 1 who stood for something very different. He told us what he believed in, and it was down for us to be convinced with his principles. And suddenly I was listening again, and I was more interested in politics. The politics that I'd become disengaged with, I was interested in and I wanted to listen. He was a man who stood with conviction, with principles, and most importantly for me, with integrity. He did what others didn't do. He didn't criticise his opponents, who sadly couldn't reciprocate the same respect back to him. He faced a media onslaught of criticism. He had the big Labour heavyweights criticising, and he didn't rise to that criticism. And for me, that showed me a very different thing in politics and in politicians. Everything that I'd seen before, this man was the exact opposite. And I remember thinking at that point, this argument of him being too far to the left, being unelectable in 2020, didn't wash with me, didn't stand any weight. Because actually what this man stood for was something very different in politics. Something which I wanted to believe in, something which I believe politics should be about. And at that point, I thought, well, this is the person that I want to make the choice to be aligned to. His politics is what I choose to be aligned to. And it wasn't just about his principles or his policies, and I've done my research on this man, but it was the person that convinced me. And it was his integrity. And I know some people might say, well, friends and family, the people that are trying to convince me not to go into politics, you're being an idealist, you're being unrealistic. But actually, I don't mind being an idealist, unrealistic, if actually what this man stands for is everything that politics should be about. Everything we've lost in politics, this man. Made me more active in community, more active in the Labour Party as well. That was the party, that was the basket of food that I actually chose. So for me, I choose principles, I choose conviction, and I choose integrity. And for those people that are active Labour members and do have the right to vote, I would ask that you also choose integrity and choose what we've lost in politics. Thank you.
I'm now delighted to introduce Councillor Lewis Davenant. Lewis was elected to Sheffield City Council this year, winning his seat from the Greens, connected with those who lost faith in Labour, and he earned their respect, he got their confidence, and he won their votes and was elected. And he sees Labour as much more than a party, but as a Labour movement. He's as comfortable on the picket line as he is in the town hall. And at 22, he's the youngest councillor in Sheffield.
Thank you, Chris. May I start by saying it's really very exciting to see so many people here today. So many people interested in Jeremy Corbyn, interested in a new kind of politics. And it's especially exciting for me to welcome the Centre Ward, which, as Chris says, I've had the privilege of representing on the City Council since May. Now, everywhere you go in our steel city, you're reminded of our industrial heritage. The steelworks in Brightside, still going. The university, which was established by a kind of Victorian crowdfunding amongst workers who wanted their children to have a better education. And as I'm sure you've noticed, even this theatre is named after the Crucible in the steel-making process, that melting pot. And this is an industrial heritage we won't give up lightly. Our city is investing in advanced manufacturing, in apprenticeships and jobs that will give us an industry into the 21st century. Where other places talk about the technology of tomorrow, Sheffield does it. And Jeremy's understanding that we won't have a healthy and balanced economy if Britain don't start making things again is certainly something that will resonate round here. And besides steel, Sheffield's another kind of melting pot, a cultural refuge. Whether that's the Chileans fleeing Pinochet, to the Yemeni, Kashmiri and Somalilander communities that make our city, and my ward in particular, such a joy to live and work in. And this is something I know that Jeremy will be proud to always defend, a tolerant and humane approach to those seeking refuge. And it's fitting too, friends, that we meet here today in the Crucible Theatre. But what I think most appeals about Jeremy is he's lit that spark of debate about the future of our party. He's willing to stir the melting pot of ideas. He wants ideas, principles and debate to breathe through our party and our movement at all times, once more like it used to. And what I think really appeals to me about Jeremy is he's prepared, when he meets somebody who doesn't agree with him, to persuade them. And our society would be so much the worse had our founders not had the courage of their convictions. Our Labour Party would not exist were it not for those workers who first persuaded their workmates that this very radical idea of a Labour Party would make their families' lives better. And I've struggled for enough dense text on the history of the Labour Party to know those founders of ours, they lived lives of struggle. But they lived those lives in the hope that no one would ever need to again. And so, friends, when we see this shameless Tory government tearing down our public services, dismantling our welfare state, attacking trade unionists who simply stand up for their basic rights at work, and threatening the very future of our NHS, we know that this is a government that is taking us backwards, not forwards. And we know, friends, that it falls to the Labour movement, as it always does, to be that force that fights for those basic principles of decency, of fairness, of social justice, and to offer hope for a better future. And to advance our society won't be easy. Politics is changing fast, and we need to change our party too. We need to become a social movement again, just like Jeremy says. We need to advance hand in hand with trade unionists, with cooperatives, with community groups, those groups that once gave us a real presence in people's lives beyond the ballot box, and will do again if we build this movement. That's how we win people's trust, that's how we change minds, and friends, that's how we transform lives. And there is no one better to lead us in this task than Jeremy Corbyn, and I am very proud to join him.
If I can introduce our next speaker, who is Alice Driscoll. She's a recent graduate of the University of Sheffield, where she chaired the Labour Student Society. And under her leadership, the Society fought to secure a living wage for all staff on the university campus that was uniting workers and students together. And in the lead up to the May election, she campaigned tirelessly across Sheffield for Labour. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce her to speak to you here now. Alice Driscoll.
Day-to-day experiences of university students and of the lowest paid workers in our society differ in many and varied ways. But something which unites them, something which compels me to support Jeremy's bid to be leader of our Labour Party, is their distrust for successive governments that don't have our interests at heart. The coalition must avoid only principles. This fully fledged Tory government lacks conscience too. as the most vulnerable are run dry for the benefit of the rich. Under the Tories, the language of hope, which once inspired students like me, has been bent into one of fear. The terms radical, inclusive, even left-wing have been redefined as slurs, and ideas which fit their description accordingly discredited. Instead, we've got the obscurity of aspiration, the invention of scroungers, and the scapegoating of migrant swarms. Neither do these terms resonate with some people more concerned with paying their rent, who live on the breadline no matter how much striving they do. So continues the vicious cycle, where those whose lives are most affected by government are the least likely to vote in an election. Politics appears meaningless to many whose fates are most aligned with it. Jeremy's fair policies and honest style of politics seem to offer a refreshing alternative to this. The hundreds of thousands of people who've engaged and re-engaged with our party over the past few months serves as testament to that. Jeremy supports free education and the implementation of a real living wage. But another thing that both students and low-paid workers are used to is being patronised, accused of naivety, and our opinions cast aside. Those criticisms stem from an elitist establishment threatened by the prospect of an electorate empowered by fair pay and by access to all the learning they want. These ideas are credible and beneficial to everybody. For one, Jeremy recognises that for every person who receives education, society benefits just as much. Knowledge is the most powerful thing in our joint possession, and used together it provides us with limitless opportunities. But denying the poorest people in Britain involvement in that process by charging thousands of pounds a term only serves to perpetuate inequality. It's exclusionary and divisive. Not everybody has to go to university, but everyone deserves a choice. And for those who would decide against, we need to offer them more alternatives that are just as valuable. David Cameron won't support a minimum wage for apprenticeships. Jeremy does. Cameron would deny housing benefits to people under 25. Jeremy wouldn't. Cameron does all this and then appears mystified when the poverty trap corners the young, the working class, the migrants. He concludes that they must be lazy, rather than systematically disadvantaged by his own policies. I'm backing Jeremy because he acknowledges the importance of properly providing for young people whatever pursuits they choose. With regards to the campaign for a living wage, the minimum wage that stands now and the Tories' fake living wage, which would replace it, is not enough to heat homes and feed families. We know that all too well. But we can no longer afford to look up patiently waiting for the wealth to trickle down. We will not stand there only to graciously receive benefits that compensate for the fact that our wages aren't sufficient. We won't stand there whilst more and more food banks open around us. And we won't then be labelled scroungers for our welfare reliance when this is born out of a system of irresponsibly low pay and fewer employment protection laws. Cameron's surprised when people turn to the welfare state in hard times. That's exactly what it's there for. But as the campaign for a real living wage gathers pace, as more of Britain's most traditionally undervalued workers become self-sufficient, the welfare state can better target its efforts at those who need it most. And that makes it a socially inclusive policy, not an attack on employers, but a promise to them that their taxes will be more effectively redistributed to those in real need. It's a holistic approach because the whole of society is benefited when all labour is accorded value and respect. It's a feminist approach because 62% of women earning under the living wage are women. When they are paid more, their well-being is improved. But our elderly and sick are also better cared for. and our schools and hospitals are cleaner, because people respond to being valued. And what do we value now? Our education is so expensive that we're forced, when considering it, to think in terms of value for money over valued experiences. In the lowest paid work, our productivity is scrupulously measured, whilst our well-being is undervalued and overlooked. I'm backing Jeremy for leader of our Labour Party because only his unapologetic devotion to fairness and equality has the potential to change the rules of the game. We'll never beat the Tories at being Tories. We need to challenge their rhetoric, not buy into its prejudices, and be clear that every single person's contribution to our society is to be valued. Thank you.
Our last speaker before, hopefully Jeremy will join us and address you, is Tosh MacDonald. Tosh needs no introduction. Tosh is president of ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union. He's worked in that job in solidarity with striking coal miners, as well as witnessing firsthand now the running down of Britain's railways brought about by privatisation. I'm delighted to introduce Tosh MacDonald.
Thanks for that, Chris, and I am so proud to be stood here as the President of Britain's Train Drivers Union in support of Jeremy Corbyn. I'm also proud that our General Secretary Mick Whelan's in this room as well, and he was sharing a platform with Jeremy in Derby this morning. I'm proud that ASLEF was the first trade union to come out and give a supporting nomination to Jeremy Corbyn. But you know, it wasn't easy, because when we first met at national level to discuss who we were going to support in the leadership election and deputy leadership election, we had no hesitation in nominating Tom Watson for deputy leader. No hesitation whatsoever. Somebody stood up to the news of the world, to Rupert Murdoch and big business, when other politicians were getting in bed with them. But we looked at the candidates for leader at that time. This, by the way, is before Jeremy threw his hat in, right? And all we could see was more of the same. More of the same policies that had cost us 5 million votes from 1997. We lost 4 million votes. Under Tony Blair, we lost a further million. Under Gordon Brown. More of the same. That cost us a majority of over 100 in the House of Commons. And people turn around and say, we can't go to the left, that's no good, we have to keep being like the Tories. Where are they? Are their eyes not open? Not so much, I've only got 5 minutes. But then Jeremy Corbyn stood. And we reconvened, and unanimously, with no hesitation, we nominated Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party. And we've not said to our members any second, third or fourth preferences. We want something that's new. We're being told it's old. It's not old. Most of the speakers on this platform today, all their lives will have only ever seen a right-wing Labour Party. They'll never have seen progressive policies. They'll never have seen socialism in Labour Party. This is new, it's fresh, and this is something that we want to say. I started work on the railways in Doncaster in 1979 as a freight yard, and all the work we did at that time was moving coal around. And you know, we owned the pits. We owned the railways that transported it to the power stations that we owned. We owned the means of generating the power and distributing it. And we distributed it where it was needed, not where the most profit was. It went into homes, into factories, to schools, to hospitals, and some were left over. What were left over, we actually exported the coal and we made profit from it. There'll be generations here today who didn't know Britain as a country that exported coal around the world. And now, because of the policies of Thatcher and those who inherit it now, they've decimated that industry, and the tax introduced in April on coal has probably seen the death knell of the last 3 pits in Britain. And that's shameful, because we had a real northern powerhouse then, not the one Osborne talks about, a real northern powerhouse. To renationalise the railways. Of course we should renationalise the railways. We should renationalise the railways. And yes, we should renationalise the power companies and the utilities. When they talk about British gas and North Sea oil, it's not ours anymore. It used to be ours, and it used to go to where it was needed. Now they get the gas or the oil and they sell it on the world market for the best price they can get, to get the most profit they can, for the private industries, for the private greed. And then, if there's an upturning need for gas in Britain, they go back to that world market and they buy it back. And if they're lucky, they buy it cheaper and they've made more profit. If it's gone up and it's more expensive, they come to us and they say, we've got to put your bills up, there's no way we can do it, it's the world market. It's a nonsense and it's a merry-go-round of private and started to work on the railway in 1979, but something else happened. That woman Thatcher got elected as Prime Minister. She destroyed the community that I live, all the communities around us. She destroyed that northern powerhouse we've got, and she still continues to do it. Her legacy carries on. Yeah. And when she was alive, I hated her. And I hated her that much, I used to set my alarm clock an hour earlier than I needed, just so I could hate her for an hour longer. I got an extra hour's kip every day, but now I hate Cameron and I hate Osborne and I hate the Liberals who kept her in power. I'm tired of going to places defending the Labour Party. I'm tired of defending it against the Greens, who were able to position themselves to the left of the Labour Party, who encourage true natural supporters of Labour, who belong in the Labour Party, to the Greens, because Labour was so far right, it was easy to look at Labour. In some cases, even UKIP were able to come out with things that were more left-wing than the Labour Party. And I'll tell you one of the best things about this movement that started around Jeremy, I think that's the death of UKIP. Of them turned incorrectly to UKIP and people like that. Well, now they know there's people for them, who represent them, who look like them, who talk like them, who have the same issues and problems as them in the Labour Party. And that's thanks to Jeremy Corbyn bringing that around. Now, I know I want to get married, but I'm not talking until Jeremy gets here. I'll carry on if you want. A lot of you here will have the misfortune of travelling on Northern Rail. Largest franchise in the country, £700 million of subsidy each year. And I've no problem with subsidising public transport. But when the Dutch State Railway, who own it now, take £40 million a year of taxpayers' money out of there and tell us it keeps the fares cheaper in Holland, that's wrong. There's something wrong there. The cuts pushed down from central government to local government, and the councillors, they make decisions and not likely that they have to make cuts, and one of the cuts they made was the free travel for disabled and elderly people. And I salute the South Yorkshire Freedom Riders. And only this week they've had another victory where bus companies now allowed them to travel before 9:30 if they've got hospital appointments by taking direct action and carrying out. But you know, the submarine franchise and the 3 preferred bidders, they go under different names, but who they really are is the Dutch State Railway, the German State Railway and the French State Railway. And I can't blame them for that. The Germans tell us that their interest in Britain's railway subsidises the German taxpayer. It should be making money for us, it should be providing a service for people, and any excess should be used to reduce fares just by taking the franchises back into public ownership that are up for renewal within the next 5 years means £1.5 billion. Billion pounds. That alone could reduce fares by 10%. Alright? You want me to stop? Listen, I will finish on this point, and it's been made earlier. It can't end at this. Because should Jeremy win or lose? If he loses, we have to be keeping this momentum going that's been created. Yeah. We have to keep We have to make sure we have people in every ward, in every constituency, everywhere fighting for Jeremy's policies, supporting Jeremy, and more importantly, defending him, because there are those within our party, particularly the parliamentary party, who have tried to turn the Labour Party into nothing more than a job club, protecting their interests, not looking after
That's certainly, I think, whet an appetite there. And it's an honour now to have, you are ready to go, Jeremy Corbyn here. You've obviously heard from some tremendous speakers. I think we should just say thank you for them now. That there will be a Q&A session, but we need you to text your questions. So if you haven't already done it, you may well be waiting to hear from what Jeremy has to say, but please, if you do want to ask a question, please text it. It's on the back of your ticket. Gareth. Jeremy Corbyn.
Kind of wondering how they got all the snooker in here. Thank you all for coming along this afternoon and taking part in this whole process. We just had an overflow meeting outside which was huge, and it's a problem to deal with, but it's kind of a nice problem to deal with, isn't it, when you've got so many people wanting to come to an event that you have to have overflow meetings outside. And I want to say thank you to all the staff in the Crucible, because they've been absolutely brilliant and fantastic. They've been really helpful. Very accommodating and very supportive. And as somebody who values and supports public theatre, art, access to art, drama, and our cultural heritage and cultural industries, we're doing a special launch on Tuesday of another document on arts and culture and how they should be funded and supported, and how we should allow every young person the opportunity of some kind of art, dance, theatre, music, unleash the creativity in all. also to say a big thank you to all our volunteer team who put on all these events that we're doing. This morning we were in Derby, this evening we're going to Manchester for a big event there, and yesterday we did Plymouth and Exeter. It's all done by train, all over the country by train, and this is the 83rd event we've done in this whole country. We go to every part of Britain, and it's interesting, the response and the reaction is very similar. Large crowds of people, young and old coming together, all ethnic groups, all faiths, huge diversity of people brought together because they want the opportunity to discuss serious political issues, but also, I think, partly because our campaign is not absolutely not based on the idea that politics is best done by being as abusive as possible to the person next to you, and then become even more abusive in reply, and then the third person becomes abusive to the first two, and the fourth one joins in and attacks the third, but not attacking the second one sufficiently strongly, and the fifth one joins in and says it's all a bunch of nothings because I can be more abusive than the rest of you. By that stage, sort of 99.9% of the population of the country are utterly turned off and think this is absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with them. I understand there's some very unpleasant things being said about us by a lot of newspapers and other people. Okay, we're not replying, we're not responding, it's not our style of doing politics. We don't do abuse, we're not going to start. Another point about our campaign is that it is about ideas. It is about giving space to those ideas. We've already sent out on Facebook pages and our own website pages a very large number of different documents on different aspects about youth, about involvement, about economy, about many, many things. But they're all ideas. They're not the last word on anything. None of us have the last word on anything. But it's an indication of the direction that I hope that the Labour Party and the Labour movement will go, that we go away from the idea of the all-seeing, all-knowing super celebrity leader that can decide all policies and pass them down the tree. Instead, we reverse the process and have everyone with their ideas coming together and passing the ideas up the tree. So we reach a consensus on how to go forward. In the Labour movement, I think, is a very, very important factor. Now, this election campaign came about because we lost the general election in May. Like everyone here, I was very angry, I was very devastated, I was very shocked by that defeat. And indeed, whilst I suppose a lot of people now claim they could see it coming, yes, to some extent one could because of the, I'll come back to this, the weakness of our message, but also you could see that there was a patchy result. Now, a wonderful person sitting on my right here is Kat Fletcher, who has the misfortune to be the agent for Islington North during the general election campaign. Well, we had an incredible result. Thank you, Kat. It was always your work. We put forward a very clear message of what we were about, which was challenging the whole austerity agenda. Now, I think Labour had a problem in the election. The problem was, going back to 2008, we had the banking crisis. The banking crisis was created by banks not being regulated, by excessive profits of those banks, by dodgy investments by those banks, by the subprime mortgage crisis in the USA, by excessive salaries, by bank chief executives, by excessive bonuses to bank chief executives and many others. And it was a crisis waiting to happen. It was not caused by the levels of pay to those that sweep our streets. It was not caused by the level of pay to nurses or to doctors or anyone else working hard in the public services. It was not brought about, actually, by supposedly excessive levels of government spending. It was brought about because of the greed and irresponsibility of banks, and they had to be taken into public ownership to prevent something worse happening. So far, so good. Absolutely the right thing to do. One of the problems was that in taking them into public ownership, we didn't take proper control over what they did. So we bought shares, we gave them quantitative easing, we ensured they could carry on. And unfortunately, too many of them have simply carried on. And now, Osborne is selling off our shares in RBS at a loss. I think that is wrong. I don't think they're his to sell. I think there are shares. When you look at the levels of sale this year of government assets, £30 billion worth of public assets are being sold off in 1 year, almost a fire sale in some cases. We've been looking into this, and as in 1997, when Gordon Brown introduced a windfall tax on those that had made excessive profits out of privatisation of utilities, I think we should look very hard and very long at the value of public assets and what they're sold, and say to anyone thinking about buying them, hang on a minute, if you bought them undervalued, if you bought them and made a huge profit out of the undervaluing of public assets, if you bought them and made a killing out of it, we think the public as a whole deserve their money back. So it's not an important issue that we have to address. And then after 2010, we have the programme of austerity, which is essentially that because of the borrowing that took place to bail out the banks, because of the support that had to be given to them, the rest of the economy has to pay, and it has to pay through cuts, it has to pay through welfare benefit cuts, it has to pay through local authority cuts, it has to pay through lower wages, through frozen wages, through job losses in the public sector. And it seems to me that the whole process has now got even worse, because 5 years on of the economy being cut, we end up with another crisis coming, therefore more cuts on the way. Everyone is proposing more cuts in the autumn statement. Goodness knows what level of devastation that will cause to local government all over the country. And so we, as a Labour Party and a Labour movement, have got to address this. Can we cut our way to prosperity, or do we instead remove this arbitrary date by which we move into budget surplus and instead invest in a productive economy? And so we're suggesting that we should put forward ideas for a national investment bank, which will be funded by a combination possibly of quantitative easing, possibly by public sector borrowing, but its duty and obligation would be to invest in the infrastructure we need. Midland Main Line is one of them, Leeds to Manchester Line is another of them, housing needs all over the country, investing in new jobs, in new industries, investing in high technology jobs, investing in green energy jobs. All of that helps to grow and expand the economy. So you do that in order to take things forward. You do that in order to create a better, more productive economy. You do that because that, I believe, is absolutely the correct direction we should be going in. Now, this is presented by some of our media as some kind of wild-eyed extremist solution. If I was making the same contribution to any meeting anywhere in Germany at the moment, then so what? We do that all the time. Look at the level of employment and success of investment and manufacturing industry in many European countries compared to ours, where we've become far too much a laissez-faire free market society with 80% of jobs in the service sector and increasing numbers in the service sector, and not doing what we're very good at in this city of all places, in high quality, high-end manufacturing enterprises. Surely the space other issues that we face within our society. If I asked you, do you all support the National Health Service, you'd all say yes. If I asked you, do you think the National Health Service is a good thing, you would all shout yes, don't shout. If I said to you, is it something we should protect, you'd all say yes, absolutely. So do I. But we've got to face a big problem. The Conservatives have put through the Health and Social Care Act. That Health and Social Care Act requires a high degree of private participation within the NHS. We seem to have lost the ability to properly plan for healthcare needs. We have encouraged profit-centred privatisation within the NHS. We have, in some cases, whole hospitals handed over to the private sector. We have GP surgeries handed over to the private sector. We have diagnostic and many other facilities handed over to the private sector. The NHS, as we know it, as an NHS free at the point of use with publicly employed and accountable staff and managed in the interests of the entire public, is being hollowed out altogether. And I'm utterly convinced at the end of the line, What the Tories really have is the idea that the NHS will be the equivalent of Medicare or Medicaid as a service of last resort for those that can't afford to do something else. Protect the NHS as a principle, but end the internal market, end the privatisation, and bring back the principle of NHS staff. One of the big problems within the NHS is the way in which we, as a Labour government in the past, as well as this government, have funded so many of the new hospitals through private finance initiative. It's simply like buying anything on a credit card, where unfortunately the credit card company also takes possession of the rest of your life. What we've got is whole hospitals paying through the nose to these PFI contractors, massive rates of interest, very expensive. We need to end the whole concept of PFI, and I would hope that a National Investment Bank will be able, where possible, to take over PFI of the collectors on the costs of the running of a hospital. But there's a second issue, and that is about the concept of our society as a whole. If you go around any town or city in Britain at any time, you will find people who are sleeping rough, who are destitute. You'll find people who are almost giving up on life. I talk to many of these people because I travel around the country a lot, I always do. And they've all got tales to tell. Things that have gone wrong. Mental health crises, family breakup, house repossessions, homelessness, sometimes former soldiers, people that have been through desperate crisis, and somewhere along the line the mental health service wasn't there for them and wasn't able to look after them. And they end up destitute, or they end up queuing up to try and get a place in a hostel for the night on a cold winter's day. You see that all the time. And then we have a steady narrative from some of our newspapers and some of our media and many of our politicians that go on and on about benefit scroungers. Now, I am not in favour of people claiming that to which they're not entitled. Obviously not, nobody is. But the whole language that's used, and then add to that the availability for work test, add to that the sanctions policy, then finally on Thursday the Department of Work and Pensions were forced to reveal the number of people that have gone through benefit sanctions and have subsequently died, some of whom have taken their own life. What is it about our society that we become so cold that we've anaesthetised ourselves to the suffering of others? Can't we, as a Labour Party and a Labour movement as a whole, be strong enough, proud enough, determined enough to stand up and say, we want to measure our success by taking people into decent housing, stopping people sleeping on the streets, stopping people being destitute, and have a social security system worthy of the name that has a safety net through which people cannot fall. There's something grotesque about saying it doesn't matter that some people have been through that kind of crisis and ended up in that place. Any of us could end up like that. It could happen to any of us. Mental health crises can happen to any of us. So, I think we need to fund our health service properly. We need to end the blame culture of the Department of Work and Pensions, and indeed the way they make things up. I was asked a short while ago by one reporter saying, well, how can all this be paid for and how can you afford it? And I pointed out, as I point out to you now, that a very big dollop of the welfare bill, as it's called, goes on a combination of in-work benefits, subsidising low wages. I'm not saying you can completely end all in-work benefits, I wouldn't want to do that, but I do think that when we have a very low minimum wage, and particularly very low youth rate of minimum wage, we end up actually subsidising low wages through that. We also end up subsidising high rents by a housing benefit system that has to pay for the private rented landlord's bill that they send to the tenant every week. So we actually end up subsidising low wages and high rents through a benefit system. Shouldn't we instead raise the minimum wage, and control the private rented sector so that instead of subsidising in secure council housing. This city built some amazing council housing, very innovative, great ideas, great architectural ideas that went into it. There was a whole period of enormous creativity in many cities across Britain about how you deal with housing issues. Unfortunately, we're not building anything like enough now. There are 200,000 new households being created every year. There are less than 100,000 new properties being built. Yet there is a great deal of money being invested in super luxury mansions and so on all over London and the South East, whilst at the same time there's grotesque levels of overcrowding in many people living in council or housing association property, and because of the way the benefit cap operates, there are whole areas of the country that are being socially cleansed of working class communities and families, and they're forced to move away. It's not just a London issue. And so, if instead of subsidising the inadequacies of the free market, we started instead investing in the housing needs of the entire community, we do a number of things. We ensure our children are growing up in decent, safe, secure, dry accommodation, where they're not forced to move every 6 months through an assured short-hold tenancy. We also create a lot of jobs in construction work and all the supply chain that goes with the construction work. There is actually a virtuous circle in that. Surely that is not just an individual aspiration, it's a collective aspiration. We can all be something we can all be very proud of. Issue I want to mention is concerning education and the values of education in our society. Our movement was founded by people with great vision, and they campaigned. They campaigned for a school place for everybody. They campaigned for the opportunities of ordinary people to get to university. They campaigned for adult education. All those things that were once readily and relatively easily available. Somewhere along the line, it was probably Margaret Thatcher who started it, she started a lot of these things, was the idea of the marketisation of education. So education becomes a sort of tradable commodity rather than something we value for itself. And I think we have to do a number of things. One is going through the age range, starting with preschool. Every child should have an opportunity of some preschool facility, preschool socialisation, not based on either poverty or the ability to pay for it, but available for all children, because coming together at a very young age is something that's very important in character forming the child. They understand the communities, they understand each other, they begin to understand how to do things together. That to me is something that is very important. And our primary and secondary schools being encouraged to become academies, or any new school now has to be a free school, thus diminishing, if not removing entirely, the role of the local education authority. Local education authorities, promoting a family of schools and a family of education locally, can achieve and do achieve a great deal. So can we not bring into the local authority orbit the academies and the free schools and the existing schools, so we be proud and strong of a family of local education facilities and opportunities, and all the add-on advantages you get of special facilities and all those kind of things that go so well with it. I was very proud when my council called me up last year and said, would you like to come to Royal Albert Hall one night to see a school's music concert? And I said, thank you very much, and I went to it. And we had, it was very ambitious, we had a 100-piece orchestra and a 200-voice choir made up of children from every single school in our borough. Only possible because we had a local education authority bringing all those schools together. You couldn't do that if you had 30 schools in competition with each other all the time. Question then of further and higher education. I come from a generation that had the opportunity of free university education, had we wanted to take it, and it was there. Parliament was asked to approve £1,000 a year fees, and then it went up to £3,000 a year, then it went up to £9,000 a year, and now they propose to lift the cap altogether. And if you take the cap away altogether, then Some universities, Oxbridge in particular, could quite easily get away with £25,000 or £30,000 a year fees. And we're told, don't worry about it, it's perfectly okay, there'll be universal access to Oxbridge, it'll be through a scholarship system. Okay. I'm very interested in this idea, the concept of multiple scholarships that are going to be provided for thousands of people. You ask who's going to fund these scholarships? Oh, wealthy philanthropists will. Okay, so we destroy universal access and we ask these wealthy philanthropists to give us some money. We give them a tax break to give them money, and then someone will get it, a lot of them won't get it, and they said just like it works in the USA. You think, oh yeah, okay, this is becoming more and more interesting. And then often the example is quoted of Bill Clinton, poor background, came from Hope, Arkansas, bright boy, did well in school, did well in college, and got a scholarship to go to an Ivy League university, went on to become President of the United States, as everybody else can. It's perfectly straightforward process. Actually, apparently in the USA, it's a perfectly normal thing to do. And he did very well out of it. What you never hear about is the hundreds of thousands of others who didn't get a scholarship, didn't get to go to Harvard, and didn't get on in life because there was no university available for them because they couldn't afford it. Now, what we're doing is loading massive debts on students as they qualify, and this budget has taken away the last vestige of support for students from poorer families who did get their fees paid and did get a maintenance grant at university. Other countries in Europe don't penalise people for wanting to be educated and wanting to contribute to society. Instead, they tax them if they earn enough money to pay tax. If they earn a lot of money, they pay more in tax. It's fairly straightforward. So why can't we, instead of going down this road of higher and higher fees, deeper and deeper debt for more and more students, instead just raise by a small amount corporation tax instead of cutting it in order to provide for university education and no fees to go with it for all students in university. Be able to work for. And so there are huge issues in education, and that's just some of them. The other one I would add is that I find it very depressing the way that adult education has been chopped apart by this country. College are often taken away. I don't see education as a luxury. I see it as something that's a right for everybody, and we all benefit from it as a result. Many other things I could say, but there's not an unlimited amount of time. I just want to make this point. We live in a world that is a very dangerous place. We live in a world where we have made some dreadful errors by going into the war in Iraq in 2003. One war tends to lead to another, and the devastation goes on. That terrible decision to go into Iraq then led to many deaths, it led to huge costs, it led to more wars, and it led to more and more refugees. And we now have a series of conflicts all around the region, and we also have millions of people who are totally displaced. All across the world there's a refugee crisis that's never been seen before. There are more displaced people across the world than there's ever been at any point in recorded history. They're dying in the Mediterranean, they're dying in the Pacific, they're dying in many places, trying to reach a place of safety, to escape from conflict, environmental degradation, or abusive and tyrannical regimes. And whilst no one government can solve all of these problems, I do think there is an obligation for the richer countries in the world to work much harder with the UN in trying to deal with the problems of the human rights abuses and the conflicts that take place, to provide more support for refugees trying to return home to post-conflict societies, but also not to use the language of abuse, which has been used by our Prime Minister and others, to very desperate human beings trying to survive in crossing the Mediterranean and trying to survive. Just like you and me, who are doing their best to survive, and none of it is easy, but we have to start from somewhere on it. And so I would hope that we, as a party, the Labour Party will change our ways, in how we operate our internal party democracy. We will recognise that more than 500,000 people are now members or registered supporters of the Labour Party. I hope that those who are registered supporters, be they union affiliates or members of the public who have decided to register to vote in this election, will become full members of the party, and that whatever the results on September the 12th, and I have no idea what it's going to be, it's 2 weeks today, whatever that result, they will stay in the party, become full members of it, so we can have what is a very, very necessary debate on the direction in which we go. Because if we go forward simply offering a form of austerity light, simply joining in too much of the blame culture against migrants, minorities or people that claim benefit, and instead offer a vision, offer a hope, offer something of an inclusive society, and say to those who think, well, it doesn't apply to them because they're quite well off and they're doing fine, thank you very much. Sorry, you may have relatives who are going to need adult social care. You may need local authority services. You will need all the things that everybody else wants and gets at the present time. So I think we need to change our ways and change our direction. And this campaign over this summer has been fascinating for the numbers of people that have joined in. The age, all ethnic groups, all faiths, all coming together in a sense of hope, unity and optimism. Hope of what we can do, unity in how we achieve it, and optimistic for a future. Are we going to continue saying to the younger generation, sorry, you're not going to get a pension when you get old, sorry, you won't get a free health service when you get older, sorry, you won't be able to get housing when you're older, you've got to do it all on your own? Are we really going to develop into a society where all that matters is the individual, not the collective? Where all that matters is the levels of inequality that are getting steadily worse? Or are we as a party going to say, go forward into this 21st century, sharing the wealth, sharing the knowledge, sharing the power, sharing the This is a fascinating process. So whatever happens in 2 weeks' time, don't go away. Whatever happens in 2 weeks' time, stay together and be involved in that process, because the prize is there. The prize is there that we make the Labour Party stronger, bigger. It's already got more members than any other time that I can see in history. That is something we should be very pleased and very proud of. And the democracy in the party has got to be strengthened at the bottom in order to ensure that SAP rises to the top. And I want to say thank you to all of you for coming today, but also to the incredible numbers of people that have come forward and helped and volunteered in our campaign. We've now got 30 registered supporter and member of the party, partly through very generous gifts from a number of unions, including Unite, my own union, Unison, and a number of other unions. Fantastic support we've had from ASLEF and a number of other unions, fantastic support we've had, but also from donations from ordinary people. The average donation we've received is £23.50. We receive no corporate donations whatsoever, and I have to say, we're not democratic and clean, and that's how politics should be, and that's how we want our politics to be. It's exciting, isn't it? When you work together, it's exciting. Thank you very much.
obviously you can see the response you get here in the Steel City this afternoon. We have got some questions. We are limited for time, but if we can try and go through those, if I put the question forward, a lot of these are, if you like, composite questions in terms of their questions put together from lots of similar questions. So the first question is from somebody called Ashley Gregory, and the question is, Jeremy, what would you, as leader of the party or the government, offer young people in this country?
There's a lot of things that I want to see for young people, particularly the opportunity to study, which I indicate in my speech, and particularly the opportunity to work. But also, I think there's a lot of other facilities that need to be improved, one of which is to make the youth service a statutory service in every local authority. And as I've indicated, I do strongly support proper and appropriate funding for arts and culture opportunities, particularly for young people. Because that is the way of lifting things. I'm also concerned that too many sports facilities, because of the cuts in local government expenditure by central government, have become so expensive that you end up with a sort of ludicrous situation with football pitches locked and kids playing football on the road outside because they can't afford to go in the pitch. I mean, it's kind of, well, it's a no-brainer really, isn't it? So those are two things. The other areas for younger people is I would abolish the youth rate on the national minimum wage. I see no point in it. And also very low room rate for young single people trying to rent in the private rented sector, and the trap that goes with that. And so those are a number of issues surrounding it, but my main area is actually to improve employment opportunities for young people, hence my suggestions, they are suggestions, about investment in productive economy and an expanding economy. Because if you're a young person, you've done well in school, you've been to college, you've been to university, you've qualified. How depressing is it if you leave university at 23, 24, 22 perhaps, and you've got a massive debt, and then you can't get any kind of work that's anything commensurate to what you studied to try to do? That is a waste of everybody's work.
How should this country respond to the migrant crisis?
The migrant crisis I talked about, we have to make sure that every European country plays a part in this. Germany has taken far more refugees than anybody else and is prepared to do so. I think we should take refugees in if they're in an absolutely desperate situation. But I also think that we should recognise there are a number of asylum seekers in Britain that have been actually extremely badly treated by the Home Office. I have cases in my own constituency where people who absolutely legitimately sought asylum in this country, fleeing from civil war, human rights abuse, torture, and many other horrible events all around the world, who've been waiting for, in some cases, years for the Home Office to kindly get round to sorting out their problem, dealing with their issue, dealing with their papers. They want to work, they want to contribute, they want to pay taxes, but instead they're forced to shuttle between churches, mosques and anywhere else, and food banks and so on, in order to try to survive. It's humiliating for them, it's a waste of resources for all of us. They're often very talented, very skilled people who want to contribute to our society. If we pride ourselves in accepting people that are fleeing from desperation and torture, as we have in the past, particularly those that are fleeing from Nazi Germany and other places, we should recognise the amazing and strong contribution they make to our society as a whole. We've got to be part of
something that you raised in your speech. Why do you think that quantitative easing would be an economically sound way of investing in infrastructure? And how would you avoid inflation and an adverse reaction from the banks?
We put forward this idea of a national investment bank which we fund through quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is where government provides resources, in this case it has been to the banks, in order to maintain their liquidity. And what we're suggesting is, as a way of stimulating economic growth, it's perfectly reasonable to invest some of that in a national investment bank, or you could provide the money through a low-cost loan system in order to promote it. Now, people say, okay, where did that idea come from? Well, it's not that original, and actually it's supported by a number of people. Stiglitz, Arjun Chan, Paul Krugman and others are saying that if you wish to expand economic growth in an economy like ours, then you're not going to do it if you leave it to free market investment, because they will just put the money either into tax havens if they get away with it, continue putting money into tax havens and get away with it. Instead, what we're suggesting is we actually put it into a productive economy. Does it create inflation? I don't believe so, because actually we create the economic growth that goes with it, and that would in turn lead to a higher rate of tax income, because you've got more people working, you've got an expanding economy as a result of it. It is a seriously thought out proposal. Richard Murphy and others, a tax consultant who's he's a chartered accountant actually. I must say, I've never seen a public meeting like we had in Nottingham where they gave a standing ovation to a chartered accountant. It was quite extraordinary when he was pointing out the levels of tax evasion. So ours is a serious set of proposals around using QE to expand our economy, around an investment bank, around collecting the uncollected tax, and about trying to control what the corporates do in conveniently shifting their headquarters from one tax regime to another in order to avoid tax. I would also say, whilst on that same subject, we should be extremely cautious of the negotiations going on in secret between the USA and the European Union on the transfer. This might sound terribly obscure, but it's actually quite an important point. It's about the power of an elected parliament over a government. At the moment, the Prime Minister can use what's called the royal prerogative to bypass Parliament if they want to. They could take us to war without consulting Parliament if they wanted to. Maybe that would be difficult for them to do, but I think there has to be real accountability. If you put somebody into any position of power, they should be accountable to others for it. And so I would look at that as well. I would also look at the question of regional government in England and devolution. Osborne claims he wants to devolve to Manchester, he wants to devolve to Leeds, he wants to devolve all kinds of bits and pieces to local government across the country. Now, at one level, I'm fine about devolution of power and responsibility, but it has to be accompanied by a couple of things. One of which is that we keep the whole principle of a universal national health service. We don't break it up. Secondly, that any services that are transferred to local government from central government anyway have to be accompanied by the funding in order to continue those services. That's being carried out by somebody else on behalf of central government. And so I think there's a lot there that has to be looked at, so I do support a constitutional convention, and I think we should establish it in opposition now, so that if and when the opportunity arises from majority Labour government, we're in a position to implement it, and also look at the funding arrangements that apply to Scotland and Wales, and look at the levels of social, health, inequality and poverty that exist in different ways in different parts of the UK, and local funding should in many cases reflect the social needs of the area, not just the population and the area. I think that would be much fairer.
Again, something you touched on, that how can we really turn around the appalling housing situation brought about by this government?
Well, I said quite a bit about housing there, and I represent a constituency which I'm pleased to say still has 40% of the housing stock in the public sector, either council or housing association, and about 30% in private rented, the rest being owner occupied. The private rented is very expensive. The benefit cap and the high rents combination is leading to social cleansing of central London and indeed central parts of cities all over Britain. How do we deal with the housing crisis? One, we stopped the sale of council properties. Invest in council housing for the virtuous circle that I outlined here. And thirdly, we encourage not a right to buy, and access to mortgages for first-time buyers so that they can buy one-bedroom flat and stuff like that, either administered through local authorities or by central government. So we actually then promote more housing development, more house building, but we don't go down the road of giving tax breaks to open up more in the private rented sector, or the permitted development rule, which the government has brought in, which allows a developer to buy an industrial or office building, convert it into private sector housing with no need for planning permission other than building control regulations, and therefore no support whatsoever for the social housing needs of a particular community. We as a society have a responsibility to make sure everybody is decently and adequately housed. It's a long time since Cathy Come Home was made, but you could make Cathy Come Home again, because it's all happening now with the brutality of short-term renting, high rents, and endless moving for families that just shifted from one private rented place to another. It's so devastating and so damaging for those families and those children, and it's also so unnecessary. We've got to intervene on housing to make sure everybody gets somewhere decent to live. It is possible.
Chris.
Final question. What would be your strategy for improving provision for young people with mental health issues?
It's very interesting that at almost every one of the meetings and hustings I've been at, and as I said, I've been to a very large number, almost all of them, the issue of health and mental health comes up. Because of the inadequacy of provision of mental health facilities, particularly for young people, often inadequate student mental health provision for often very stressed students in universities and colleges, but also there's still quite a big area of stigma within our society over people that have some kind of crisis. We could all have that kind of crisis. We can all go through stress in our lives. We can all go through bad experiences. And I long for the day when our society is as tolerant as some Scandinavian societies, where on one occasion a Prime Minister went through a crisis of depression and was given 6 months leave of absence to have some help and support and get over it, and went back to continue being Prime Minister. Would that happen here? No. I don't think so. And so we have to fund it properly. We also have to ensure there are locally available provisions of emergency beds in mental health hospitals. In some parts of the country there are none, or only a very large distance away, so you end up with people going through a crisis, being driven literally hundreds of miles in order to try and find somewhere they can be looked after and supported, and in some cases a huge waiting time before you can get any kind of supportive talking therapy, and these things actually matter in our society. There are many causes of mental health stress problems, some from housing, some from employment, some from debt, some from family breakup. There's lots and lots of reasons for it, but we don't fund properly the mental health needs, particularly of children and young people. We don't help people enough, we don't provide enough crisis resources and facilities, and I am very determined that our NHS has sufficient funding to deal with all the mental health crises. We went through a big campaign in my area over the defence of our local hospital, the Whittington Hospital. It was threatened with the closure of its accident emergency department. If that had gone ahead, it would have closed the hospital. And we had a great campaign, and eventually we won it. And the hospital is there, and it's doing fine. We won it, we defeated what the health authority were trying to do. And when we had a rally at the end of it to celebrate, because it was something to celebrate, Shirley Franklin, the woman who'd organised the whole thing, she said, thanks very much everybody. She said, had there been a closure threat to the mental health unit of the hospital, would you have all turned out on a demonstration? Would you have all marched in support of it? Sadly, I think we all know the answer to that question. So let's recalibrate our views on mental health, recalibrate our views on the needs of mental health, recalibrate our views on the causes of mental health problems that people have, and say in a civilised society we treat that with just the same urgency and importance as we treat any physical problem that people have, which brings about their...
Thank you so much. It is sadly time to bring the meeting now to a close. Sadly, we get to stay in Sheffield. He's going to go to Manchester. Yorkshire, Lancashire.
I realise.
I think certainly I was already inspired by Jeremy and knew that's where my vote is going. I hope you are equally as inspired, even more so now. I think those things to remember is that whatever does happen, it has started, it has begun, and it's up to all of us to keep the momentum up after the 12th of September. Those three words that Jeremy used, hope, unity and optimism, that is the key forward. Now you can start, I said, get involved with your local Labour Party if you're already a member. If you're a supporter, become a member. Get involved in local groups, and you can start doing that next Saturday. Rotherham Unite Against Fascism. You may have had a look at Britain First are coming to Rotherham. There is a protest organised meeting at 12:30, All Saints Square, Rotherham. We should go show solidarity with that campaign. The best way to keep in touch with what's happening in Jeremy's campaign here in Sheffield is to go to the email address, which is Sheffield for Corbyn, all lowercase and number 4. So Sheffield number 4 Corbyn@gmail.com. Probably have those details by registering here anyway to get a ticket. And I remind you of those other two events that I mentioned. The 20th of September, a party organised by Jeremy's Sheffield campaign at the Queen's Social Club, 3 till 7 o'clock. And if you can't wait till then, somebody, I don't know who, but you might get a drink in the old Monk straight after this in Tudor Square. So it just remains for me to thank you for your questions and for being here, the staff at the Crucible, everyone who has organised not just one but two amazing rallies on the same afternoon. This afternoon, and especially to what we all hope will be the next leader of the Labour Party.